You know, Oz, people underestimate you, but not me. I've always known you were capable of more.
Welcome back, everyone. This is my Penguin breakdown of episode 1, which was titled After Hours, which to me could speak to the idea that Alberto Falcone went to the Iceberg Lounge after hours, a decision he would later regret. This was a gritty and raw and fascinating premiere episode, and there's a lot to dig into. Spoilers ahead. We open with hearing the news coverage from the events that took place during the film The Batman, leading up to the Riddler's final plans for destroying Gotham's corruption and unmasking this truth by flooding the streets as we see the Penguin watches from where we last saw him looking at the sunrise, something to keep in mind throughout this episode. 1 week after Riddler's attack, we see that the city's struggling to recover. While the wealthiest were spared, we see the streets post-flood are hit by a crime wave. Now to me, I've covered this on a video on my channel regarding the confirmation from the show writers that the Batman will not be appearing in the show, but doesn't rule out that Bruce Wayne might not pop up. Again, check out that video on the channel. But the news headline talking about the crime wave across Gotham could be the show's reasoning to why the Batman will not be in the show, because he's busy saving Gotham post-flood and he's dealing with other things across Gotham.
It's a big city. I can't be everywhere.
Now we get our first major change from the film The Batman to this television series as we see that they have recast Carmine Falcone. Now even though he's dead, we see that he's now being played by the great actor Mark Strong. Now for people like myself that fan casting him as Mr. Freeze and Matt Reeves' The Batman Part 2, I guess we can knock his name off the list. Now to backtrack, Strong did take over the role who was previously played by John Turturro, who played Falcone in the Batman film. Now my guess to why they recasted the character, but we'll probably see flashbacks of the character throughout this series, as the news reports that Alberto Falcone is said to be taking over the family business. Now, I gotta mention before moving on, after rewatching The Batman for the millionth time right before watching this episode, seeing the streets of Gotham and the tone and the music playing in the background, it just makes me feel like we never left this world, and to me, it's a perfect handoff from the film into the television series. We watch as Oz heads to the Iceberg Lounge with a sledgehammer in hand, and I love this little Easter egg with him using his umbrella, which in many depictions of the characters, an umbrella is the Penguin's signature weapon, as he uses the hammer to gather one file hidden behind a wall, and he takes interest in a particular piece of information that he's going to use for later. Now to have a file behind a wall seems to be a secret that Carmine wanted to keep to himself, or at least in a contingency plan that Falcone kept hidden from everyone else. One of the photos that stood out to me, at least in connection to this episode, was this particular photo showing the actor Michael Kelly, who's going to be playing Johnny, who we meet a little bit later in this very episode. Now in the comics, he is an underboss of the Falcone crime family. In the picture that Oz looks at and he gets excited about, it's showing Johnny engaging in some type of affair or sexual activity with some unknown woman. Now the question is, will Oz use this against him in the future after their encounter later in this episode? As we see, Oz comes across some jewelry, and it's very clear that he was going to take this, but we see Alberto arrives as we see Oz plays coy as if he was going to give this to him to begin with. This to me is one of many examples shown in this very episode as we see Oz being a quick thinker on his feet. As Oz celebrates Alberto's new position, Oz and Al share a drink as Al also takes some drops. They talk about this new deal that Al's got going as he's seeking to revolutionize the drug game and potentially replacing the drops on the street of Gotham with something new, and doesn't want the others to know about it quite yet. Now, I'm very curious to learn more about this new drug on Gotham streets, because if you're familiar with the Batman lore and even going back to the Batman the movie, that is very synonymous with Gotham as far as the main drug that they use on the streets. So what will they introduce, and who could be cooking up this new drug? Is it someone from Batman's rogues gallery? Could it be someone like Hugo Strange or someone like the Scarecrow? Let me know if you are thinking that someone of importance will be involved in this new drug. We learn about the infamous ring that Carmine wore all the time, as we also find out that it once belonged to the mob boss Salvatore Maroni, as Carmine wore it as a trophy, and it symbolizes power to the person who wore it. Now, it's important to remember that the Batman established their version of Salvatore Maroni as someone who once ran Gotham, but after Thomas Wayne died and his renewal plan was fought over by the powers that be of Gotham, whether it was Carmine Falcone, the DA, the Commissioner, and others, they set up Salvatore Maroni, and he's been in prison for the last 20 years. And you gotta imagine he was probably pretty happy to hear the news of what happened to Carmine. As Oz and Al continue their conversation, we see Oz talks about a gangster he admired while growing up by the name of Rex Calabrese. Yet another character that comes from the comics, as he was a lion-themed Gotham City mobster created in the New 52. Now, unfortunately, unless they use him in flashbacks, we learn that Rex passed away when Oz was 14. Now, not to jump too far ahead, but I wonder if Rex will be secretly revealed to be Oz's true father, who we see is mentioned by his mother later in this episode. Now, after hearing a story about Rex, we see Al misunderstands the story and thinks that Oz is either thinking of him to be too little, or the story was about Oz's dream that he hopes to be remembered like one day. As Al laughs in Oz's face and calls his dream pathetic and mocks him, we see this leaves Oz to shooting and killing him. Now, I'll be honest, initially I thought this was a dream sequence because, I mean, we've seen it 1,000 times in movies and shows where a character imagines killing a person, but a second later we find out that it's fake. But no, that's not the case with this show. He just killed Al, the current head of the family business, and he laughs at first, but realizes what he just did as the title card appears. So much to love about this opening scene, but one of the things I want to point out is understanding why Oz shot him. Now, he mentions it later that he laughed at him, and we'll talk about that. But remember, it's been less than 24 hours since Al's father, Carmine, laughed at him in a similar fashion and made fun of Oz, and we know that Oz tried to kill him before the Riddler did, so to me, Oz had a bullet ready for the Falcone family. But to go back to that opening scene, it just set the table and set the tone for the rest of this episode and sets the stage for what to expect moving forward. We see Oz gets the body prepared to get rid of, and I thought this was an interesting little small moment where initially Oz is carrying the body down each step, but then he realizes he's dead and he tosses the body down instead. It's almost like he's so used to respecting the Falcone family and carrying their weight, but not anymore. As Oz heads out, he sees that some kids are trying to jack his purple car, as Oz manages to catch one of them by the name of Victor, who will end up saving Oz by the end of this episode. Now, I could be wrong, and let me know in the comments below, but the Victor character, I believe, is just created for the purposes of the show and doesn't have any lore from the comics. Again, let me know in the comments below. But we see Oz makes Vic help by telling him,
"This scumbag, you disrespected me, you're gonna disrespect me, Vic." No, because you and me, we're in this together now.
As this new relationship begins. We see Oz goes through Al's phone before crushing him with his gun, and he finds the date of this new shipment drug, which is on the 18th. But my question is, what exactly is Gotham Knights is going to take place on the 23rd? Is that just like an Easter egg to the video game and the characters by the name of Gotham Knights? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Now in the car, we see Oz and Vic having a conversation, as Oz and Vic both come from a similar neighborhood on the east side, as Oz shares a childhood story with him about his brothers and how they used to go to the corner mart, the same one that we visit at the end of this episode. Notice that Vic has a stutter, and I'm pretty sure it's because he's nervous right now because his life might be ending anytime soon, but I'm also curious to know if Oz sees a little bit of himself in Vic, and maybe he had a stutter when he was young. Now, to me, a character trait like this could lead to something later. You'll notice that Vic's stutter slowly goes away by the end of this episode, which could also mean that he's more comfortable around Oz, but I also wonder if he'll come back at some point later in the season, showing that he is nervous in a particular situation, and that stutter being like Oz's way to know that he's lying about something. So as an audience, I think it'll be interesting to kind of follow his stutter throughout the series, like if he'll just eventually get rid of it by the end of the show, just showing how confident he is and how different he is from the beginning to the end. So definitely keep an eye out for the stutter moving forward for the Victor character. I definitely had to point this out again, just having watched The Batman. I love that we get to see this little Easter egg of the same street that we saw the robbery happening in the opening scene of The Batman. We see that Oz and Vic arrive to Eve's place, as this appears to be Oz's lady friend, who he needs to cover for him as an alibi, as she agrees to help. Now, we don't see Eve in the rest of this episode, but I do wonder how important she will be moving forward, and if she'll get roped into the story as leverage against Oz, and if she'll keep his secret. Now, Oz gets rid of the evidence by burning it away and grabs a bite to eat with Vic before dumping the body, and you can just get the sense that Oz definitely has plans to get rid of Vic, and I think Vic is very much aware of that. We see that just in a couple scenes later, but I think the reason why Oz ultimately decides to keep Vic around is because he does see a little bit of himself in Vic. Now they eventually find a car to dump the body in for now, which is the same car that we see later in the episode, but before leaving, Oz takes Salvatore's ring. Now, Oz says to Vic to take a look at the sunrise, obviously thinking he's about to die, but instead Oz gives him a cigar and tells him exactly whose body they've been handling all night. As Oz thinks that Vic can be useful, at least for now, but promises to kill him if he steps out of line as he watches the sunrise. Again, this whole looking at the sunrise seems to be something important to Oz. Now, he does that obviously at the end of the Batman, at the beginning of the show. He does it now, so it definitely has some type of importance to him. Now, does that stem from some type of childhood trauma or childhood memory, or is it some type of metaphor of him rising from the dark into his power? As they eventually arrive to Oz's place and we see Vic looks around and he sees a photo of what appears to be a young Oz with two other kids, most likely his brothers that he mentioned a little bit earlier, and you can also see this same exact photo later at his mom's house. As we get a little bit of an insight on why Oz walks with a limp as he takes his shoes off, and we see that one of his toes on his feet are all mushed together. To me, this is the show's grounded approach to explaining why Oz walks with a limp, rather than it being the comic book walk like a penguin reasoning. I love this overhead shot of showing us parts of Gotham that was hit the hardest during the floods. You'll even notice signs on buildings saying "help us" and "don't forget about us," which is definitely a more grounded approach to us as an audience, remembering to what happened to New Orleans during Katrina, and it just also just continues to paint the picture of the poor conditions of the forgotten parts of Gotham and what they're experiencing. But another key thing that I love about this moment is you'll notice that the Riddler's theme is playing in the background during this scene, just kind of again showing his actions of what he did to Gotham. Oz has to go back to business as usual to keep appearances normal as he heads back into work, as we see Oz is preparing to blackmail a politician as he's got some dirt on him and he owes some debt to Carmine. Now you'll notice this is the same guy he took from the hidden file at the Iceberg Lounge. Now despite the recent flood, we see that the drop still must go out as one of their men was jumped and had their stash taken. Again, this is just showcasing that the crimes of the streets are still happening at an all-time high, and is also showing that they're preparing this show to show this gang war is potentially coming. As Oz gets called in by the Falcone family, I love this line here as he explains to Vic how he has to operate when he's around them.
It's all a song and dance. 9 times out of 10, these top-tier guys want to meet face-to-face to feel big, so I make myself small. They feel better about themselves, and I get to go back to work.
You get to meet the characters Milo and Johnny, again Johnny being the same character who we saw that photo of that Oz took, as Oz learns of the movement and shutdown of one of his plants that he ran, and they say that they want to shut it down because of the recent floods, but also because of the heat on their back after the recent changes in the Falcone family. Now obviously Oz isn't happy about the news, but he's reminded that this isn't his business, but instead it's the family's, and he has to do what he's told. But again, we get to see Oz thinking quick on his feet as he uses Al's plans for this new business and this new drug to buy him some time to prove himself. Now as Oz is going over this plan and how it can potentially be profitable and he'll be able to run this operation smoothly, in comes Sophia Falcone, who's Carmine's daughter, who was recently released from Arkham. I love the introduction to this character in the show with her wearing all white. It's almost like she's a new person. She's sent from the heavens as an angel, but if you're familiar with Sophia like I am from the comics and also the animated movies, trust me, she is far from an angel. Now within this brief conversation, we learn that Al actually refused to bring his bodyguards with him the night that he went to the Iceberg Lounge, which explains why he was alone, which is a question I had a little bit earlier in the show, like if you're this new head of the family, why don't you have any security with you? But again, the question is, why did he go to the Iceberg Lounge by himself, which I'm hoping is something that's revealed later on. Now we see Sophia asking Oz if he's seen her brother, which he obviously says no, but we also see that Oz learns that he only has 48 hours to shut down his plant. Again, remember that Oz has some dirt on Johnny, and I bet you that he'll use that against him sooner rather than later. Now outside, we see Oz is yet again confronted by Sophia as she asks him if he's seen her brother, and of course again he says no, but she notices the bullet holes in his car and she invites him for a bite to eat. Now Sophia takes him to a spot that her father would take her and her brother when they were younger. Now you'll notice that Sophia is eating eating like she hasn't had a decent meal in a while, which probably speaks to her literally just getting out of Arkham, as we can notice that other people are looking at her in shame. As we see Sophia talking about her presence in the city of Gotham, how people look at her, as she talks about the story of how people used to call her Hangman, as she's known around the parts as a psycho killer. Now, Sophia briefly brings up the relationship that Oz had with her father, at least their working relationship, as we may explore how Oz got involved with the Falcones, and it's actually something that we get a little bit of insight in the conversation that's had a little bit later in this episode. Now, again, we just saw yet another example how smart and intelligent Oz can be when he is put on the spot, as he makes up the story that her brother told Oz about his plans, but to keep it a secret, and technically he's not lying. Now, Oz brings up the fact that her brother was an addict, and he's done this before where he would go missing for days after going on the bender. And he also brings up the fact that he has an alibi that he was with his friend Eve. I absolutely love the foreshadowing in this conversation of Oz saying that her brother will turn up and he's sure of it, and later we see that he definitely pops up again. I thought the interaction between these two characters was excellent, and the sheer presence of Sophia is intoxicating. Now, Oz is clearly aware that he should be very careful around Sophia, and I love the presence of the character so far, and their scenes together definitely gets me excited to see what they're going to be doing for the rest of the season moving forward. I gotta call out this little character detail, but also a great callback to the Batman. When Oz and Vic are on the subway, you'll notice that Oz doesn't sit in the handicap seats. That's because in my mind, he doesn't see himself in that light, but I also have to point out that random person who's handing out the QR codes, who says, scan this code and you'll learn the truth about Gotham, you'll notice that that is one of the Riddler's followers because of the mask he's wearing. We see that Oz takes Vic to his mother's house, and we see that he gifts his mom the same jewelry that he found in Carmine's secret stash, and you'll notice that she's not calling him Oz, but instead she's calling him by his actual name. Again, this to me is an example of how the show's going to humanize the character, having his mother interacting with him, having interactions with Vic, but then also showing that this character is corrupt, that he is evil, and he's killing people and getting people killed. So I'm just loving how they're handling this character so far. And you get a sense that his mom, Frances Cobb, is dealing with some type of mental issues with her not taking her meds. Now, I could be wrong, but I think that his mother might suffer from Alzheimer's because she mentions that she hid her medicine in the tub to keep away from the boys. Now, I'm assuming she's referring to Oz and his brothers when they were younger, that she would probably do this, which, by the way, do you all think that his brothers are still alive? I think that they may have died, and we might get some backstory on that, because you'll notice that in this scene, Oz says to her that he's all she's got, meaning that his brothers are no longer alive. Now, after his recent encounter with Sophia, Oz is here to skip town with his mom, and she knows that he's on a run, and she says,
Tell me first what I did to lose your respect. I'm in here, you're trying to buy me off with a necklace? About an urgent special occasion.
Ma.
Did I raise my sons to lie to me? What did you do? Come on, what did you do?
Oz eventually tells his mom why he ultimately killed Al, because he was embarrassed, and that seems to be something that triggers him, because going back to the Batman, he was embarrassed that Falcone called him out and he wanted to shoot him. So we can tell that embarrassing him, laughing at him, is a triggering point for Oz. Now, to assess this relationship between the mother and son, you definitely get a sense that this relationship is very interesting to say the least, as she reminds him who he is and hypes him up. But also, it's important to point out that she's very aware of what her son does, and again, this makes me think that she's used to this line of business, whether it's her son or sons. But I want to go back to my theory, and I could be completely wrong about this, but maybe she and Rex, who we know Oz looked up to, who was the big mobster in the town, maybe they were together and Oz doesn't know that that's actually his father. Now, as we wrap up this episode, we see Vic shares his concerns when not being able to live up to this lifestyle, but Oz reminds him that they were made for this. Now, within that conversation, it sounded like to me that Vic might have lost his home and potentially his family during the Gotham floods, which would explain his sense of desperation and why he's hanging around Oz as they're getting the next steps of Oz's plan into motion. Now, this relationship so far between Vic and Oz is just so fascinating to me, because I can see it ending one of two ways. I think it's going to be, number one, very important to the series, obviously, but I don't see it ending well for Vic. Or could you all see him maybe being Oz's right-hand man by the end of the series, and he will be like his main guy leading to the Batman Part 2? Now, we cut to seeing Oz paying a visit to the famous Batman lore prison of Blackgate to see Sal Maroni, played by the incredible Clancy Brown. We see Oz telling Sal that he wants to work for him, and he gives him the rundown of the situation. Now, Sal calls out Oz for trying to buy his loyalty, but what's important to me is his refusal to join Oz. He mentions in this conversation that it was Oz's drug house that was busted during the raid or the takedown of Saul, which basically is him implying that Oz was in on the takedown of Saul and that he knew that Carmine was a rat, which to me just adds so much more context to the confrontation that we saw in front of the Iceberg Lounge in the Batman, where Oz was calling him that rat. That was a power move by Oz to show that he was in control, but also to look down upon Carmine in front of his men. Now, Saul eventually tells Oz to go screw himself and to leave, but before he does, Oz gives him back his ring, as Oz tells him exactly how he got it.
They've been flaunting what they done to you for years.
But how is it that you have it?
Maybe more than what you think.
Now, in the final moments of this episode, we see Sophia and her men are outside of Oz's place, and Sophia spots him in his car and they go after him. Oz almost manages to escape by hiding in the trunk and gets one of the men hit by a school bus, but he eventually gets caught. Notice how Sophia's wardrobe went from her wearing all white to her now wearing all black in this interaction, which to me shows her true colors. Now, Sophia tells Oz about the promise her brother made to her when he would visit her in Arkham. Now, Oz's story is holding up, and since Sophia found one of the kids that Oz shot at outside of the club, the same one he claimed that he wasn't at the night of her brother's murder. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but yet another example of Oz making his way out of a situation as he gets that kid killed, making Sophia put her murderous ways to the test. Now, with a wire against his arm and bleeding out, Sophia wants to know if he thinks that she's crazy and wants to know if her brother is still alive. But at the last second, a car outside hits the wall, causing a distraction. Now, Sophia looks in the trunk and finds her brother's dead body with the words payback inside of the trunk, with his ring finger missing, as she screams and Oz laughs. Chills, I mean legit chills, were running through me during this scene because this was such a great setup. Seeing Sophia screaming in pain after losing her brother against Oz, who's laughing in the same way that he did when he killed him, was just perfect. As our last shot of the episode shows Vic and Oz getting that mixed drink that they were talking about earlier in the episode, as this was all a part of Oz's plan. Now, with Sal having his ring back, it sets the stage for a war between the families as Vic and Oz are prepared to go to work 9 to 5 to take over Gotham.
I'm gonna run this goddamn city, and I want you in on it. Yeah, you earned it. You know, for the most part. Guys like us, we gotta stick together.
Now, if you've been a part of the channel, you know I watch a lot of television. There's some good stuff out there, there's some bad stuff out there, there's some great stuff out there, but one of the things that seems to be a task that many shows struggle to do, and that is hitting the ground running in its premiere episode, and in my opinion, this was one of the best premiere episodes I've seen in quite a while. From seeing the ground level of the events after what happened to Batman, the tone, the grittiness, the characters feeling so developed and they feel real and feel lived in. The way that Colin plays Oz is just fantastic. You get to see the human side of the character. You get to see his dreams and his aspirations to be respected and remembered like Rex. I loved all the details in this episode, especially from the production side of how Gotham looked, because if you notice, everywhere we went that was hit by the flood, it was muddy, it was wet, just showing the effects of what was left after the flood of what the Riddler did in the Batman. And again, I love the little comic book references and nods to the different color schemes of how in the comics we can see the Penguin wearing black and white or wearing purple, and even the use of his umbrella was just such a fine detail. So if you couldn't tell, I absolutely love this premiere episode, but I do have some questions before we wrap up this video. Again, what's the big deal with Oz and him watching the sunrise? Who really is Victor, and can he be trusted, and will he eventually turn on Oz? After finding her dead brother, it's safe to assume that Sophia is going to be running the family business, but what does this mean for Sal Maroni? Going back to that revolutionary new drug on Gotham streets, who's going to be the supplier? Why did Al go to the Iceberg Lounge alone, and why didn't he take his sister Sophia? Now, we're going to wrap things up here, but if you have stuck around to this point in the video, I really appreciate you all. Do me a favor, put in the comments right now, hashtag 9 to 5. I'll be back next week to discuss episode 2, and every week after, I'll be covering this entire season, and I would love for you all to be my Vic and tag along with me on this journey. If you appreciate this breakdown and you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit that like button, but also hit the share button and share this to anyone and everyone you know that's interested in loving this show just as much as we are, and also please consider sticking around by hitting that subscribe button and also hitting that bell notification. You all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.